think businesses should think very carefully about using it to actually alter the value that they as a business add, because it could end up taking them down a path that they don't necessarily want to go down, particularly with so much unknown about where it's going and what the big AI firms might do. There's a bit of a technological war going on really on either side in terms of the more tools and technology that employers can adapt to deal with a higher volume of applicants, but at the same time applicants are also getting their hands on tech that helps them, apply for many, many more roles in a more impressive way.
Hello and welcome to Tech for Finance, where we help finance professionals leverage technology to level up their lives. I'm your host, Adam Schultzen, and in this episode, we're going to be chatting with Craig Humphrey. Craig's the VP of Finance and Operations at Arctic Shores, a company specializing in technology-driven, behavior-based assessments to help businesses identify top talent. Craig started his career in audit, and prior to joining Arctic Shores, held senior group finance positions amongst a number of leading tech firms. When he's not working, Craig enjoys spending time with his 3-year-old twins and loves a good barbecue. But before we start, if you like what you hear today, please make sure to subscribe to Tech for Finance on your favorite podcast platform and on YouTube. Thanks for coming along today, Craig. Enjoy it.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
No worries. So we had a catch up, it was probably a few weeks ago, in your snazzy offices in Manchester over a coffee. That was quite good. I'm a little bit jealous.
That's right. Yeah. We just moved to Blackfriars House. It's nice. We really like our new home.
Yeah. Very good. But of course, you guys are, I suppose you're still, are you still classed as startup, or are you getting a bit past that now?
I think we say scale up. We like to think we've hit product market fit, and it's all about how we can now start to scale everything up. So I think we prefer scale up, but I think your definition of startup's quite wide open, isn't it? Really? I think I remember recently Uber still call themselves a startup. So
yeah. We'll go with scale up, shall we? Yeah, that's good. And for our American listeners, there was a recent, I think it was an article that you shared, Craig, wasn't it, about Manchester, which is where we're based, being one of the fastest growing tech hubs in the UK past London.
Yeah, I think it starts with the money. There has been an uptick in the amount of particularly venture capital in the area. I think if you speak to some of the leading VCs, such as Pretora, for example, who've recently invested in us, there's still a bit of a gap between what's the level of investment per company or per person outside of London versus in it. So I still think there's some catching up to do, but it's just seemed to see really exciting businesses just springing up almost on a daily basis, not just in Manchester, but in plenty of the other northwest cities. So yeah, it's exciting place to be. Really feeling the pull into London anytime soon.
I see. It's still a bit cheaper than London as well. For now.
Indeed. Yeah.
Very good. So I wanted to chat a little bit about, I won't necessarily say time management, but of course, as you appreciate, 99% of my audience is finance professionals, right? And so your title is VP of Finance and Operations, which means that you wear quite a lot of hats. Yeah. Is that easy? And I say that looking at your experience. So your experience is predominantly finance focused, right? So what's it been like, widening or broadening your horizons, as you say, and trying to bridge the gap between finance and other areas of the business?
Yeah, absolutely. So I, previous to my current position, I've really been focused purely in the finance area and finance and accounts department. So I've held finance manager roles, but again, just working mostly with other people in other finance positions, whether that's treasury or reporting. And so I joined Arctic Shores about 4.5 years ago and came into my first the number one finance position, initially as financial controller, helping build out just the finance function. But through the course of the growth of the company, about a year ago, took a leadership role that incorporated more responsibility for some of the other back office functions. So it's your HR, IT, legal, bit of data and biz ops. So a bit more of a broad range, really. And so it does have a big impact on the day-to-day job. I suppose, number one question to be answered was, well, how is the finance team going to keep running day to day when there's so much else to look after? So actually one of the critical things for me was to find a really strong number two. Obviously, I'm sure we'll touch more on building teams, but that was one that we just couldn't get away from, which is I really would be letting the team down if I tried to spread myself that thin that there just wasn't anybody there. So that was a really critical thing for us, and thankfully we have got a really strong finance manager in place to help do a lot of the day-to-day bits. But we still work incredibly closely as a team because we're just not a big function. There's 7 of us in ops generally, of which two of the people in my team of finance, not including myself. Um, it To answer the original question, it's not easy. It's very difficult, but it's just so valuable and useful to wear those different hats. Um, you do find yourself naturally over your finance career seeing things through that single lens, particularly around cost control and investment appraisal, but especially if we're working for a small people-based business such as a SaaS tech company that I work for now, is there's just so much nuance around a lot of the business decisions that happen. And as much as you'd like everything to be a black and white financial decision, that is one big factor, but there's just so much else at play. And being able to work so closely with other support functions, like I said, including HR, helps you just see it through so many different coloured lenses. And it really does make the conversations with leadership and with the board much more well informed and balanced, and just shows that you've really looked at it from other aspects. Obviously, every business is different, but as I said, we're a people business, so I think of our HR team. I mean, traditional thinking 20 years ago might have been that finance and HR are sort of natural enemies. HR just want to constantly invest in the team, and finance might be wanting to keep costs down and say no. But
Yeah.
actually, if you have got a people-based business, they are completely aligned, or should be, in that you've got to either keep investing in your team because that's the asset that you've got. So they can be mutual, and in agreement. The other functions that I look after, it's great that we've got that single focus of leadership because it does enable us to make sure that everybody's goals and key results are all aligned, which we like to set every quarter to make sure that everybody's priorities are all focused, not just on our departmental objectives as a team, but also for the wider business. So it's great for alignment as well.
And what does that quarterly review look like? Is it a face-to-face meeting when you sit down? Do you have like a templated like workbook that you work through or
Bit of both, really. So we do make good use of tech. We lean quite heavily on our HR system. So we use Bob or Hi Bob as our HRIS. I mean, I'm not necessarily advocating that. It's great. There's others out there. That's the one we happen to use. But it helps. It helps give a lot of structure to things like our quarterly performance review, our goal setting. It does an awful lot for people management. We could still use a bit more of it, but we have leveraged it quite a lot. So that will help things like we can all use it to enter our individual goals. We can use our team goals, and we can tag them to make sure that they're all aligned to the strategic pillars of the business. And then in terms of reviewing them, what we actually like to do is get together in person on a function by function basis. So I'll get our ops team together, those different departments, and we'll kind of do a bit of a presentation to ourselves as a team to say, here's how the course has just gone, here's what our OKRs were, and here's how we did. And then here's a summary of how we're going to take those into the next quarter and what else we're gonna look at doing. So we do try to sort of get ourselves together in person at least once a quarter. But we are a primarily remote team, so we do have to leverage tech as much as we can.
is it do I remember you saying it's Slack that you use?
Primarily for day-to-day comms, yes. The whole business is on Slack. We've kind of been on it for as long as I can remember, really. One of
Mm,
those sticky SaaS products that once a few people get using it, it
yeah.
grows virally. So yeah, we took a business license out. Even though our sort of day-to-day business enterprise software is really the G Suite, and we just find for sort of instant messaging and groups and channels, Slack's just one of those things that once you get used to it as a team, you just can't live without it. It's just so reliable. We've all got the separate app downloaded as opposed to the browser, so it's just there and it's
Mm,
just always on and always works. But we have other teams outside of our ops function that will just got a feature called a huddle where you can basically open up a call and people can just dip in and out of it. Some teams will just leave that open all day. So they'll just be happily working in their home office on their own. But they can hear their entire team just having a conversation throughout the day whilst they're doing it. So yeah, we make good use of it. I think find it really easy to use.
That's that's really interesting. And I think so we use Teams. I use Slack, but more for like community and personal stuff outside work. So unlike you guys, we're Microsoft Suite, not G Suite, but we don't need to get into a battle on which is best because there's obviously pros and cons for each, right? But I've not, apart from the Meet Now in Teams, I don't think there's an official like huddle type thing, right? But it's an interesting concept because I mean, quite a lot of my background is sales, as you know, and the with sales comes sort of an element of camaraderie, especially when it comes to the outbound side of things, making calls, getting that. It's always one of the biggest struggles is, the part of the job that people don't really enjoy. And the way that people get around that is by feeling though they're as part of the team. But then, of course, we end up in this remote based culture where you've got people like having to psych themselves up from home. And I did often play with, encouraging the team with maybe just have an open Teams call, like even if it's just one to one with somebody else that you nominate as your partner, for example. It never materialized, but it's got the culture whirring again. I don't think I'll manage to business to migrate to Slack, but I think it's just one of those strings to the bow that makes that remote work piece a bit easier.
Well, I think in terms of the adoption, there is a phase to get through where people need to experience it and see how great it is, and then as long as the solution itself is good enough, it's you kind of have that eureka moment, a bit like the first time you got an Uber, you're just like, that's it now. But something like the use of the Slack huddles and the channels is it's just a really great way of being able to just quickly ask somebody a quick question and not have to think, right, let's go and look at their calendar. When are they free? So I can ask them that thing. It does try to replicate that feeling of I'm at work with my team. It's not the same, obviously. Sometimes you can't just be sticking your head over your monitor and just bugging someone there and then. But technology's progressing in that respect every day. I think Slack are doing a pretty decent job actually of bolting on those extra features. They do seem to be listening to customer feedback quite well and thinking about what are the little bits and pieces around the comms that could really make the difference. But it's something we think about all the time, which is when we went to a remote world, basically post COVID, we took the decision as a business that we were going to follow a hybrid model. So we do have office space that staff can make use of, but again, it's completely flexible and everyone's able to choose how much time they want to spend in the office. And we do see the value of meetups, and so we do host some regular ones. As I mentioned, the quarterly catch up that we do as a team, and we have a business quarterly. But it comes with its pros and cons. I think there's a large consensus with our team that individually we all feel very, very productive. But when we look at it from a leadership perspective, I'm always sort of asking the question: do we feel that as a team, or as teams, or even as an organisation, are we still maintaining that efficiency? How easy is it to just get one small task done that involves collaborating with 7 or 8 people? And are we being slowed down by the fact that you do have to perhaps look at a calendar and think, right, when can I get these 4 people on a call? Oh, not for another 3 weeks. What am I going to do?
Mhm.
So wherever these tools come in and help break down those barriers is obviously great. So we're always on the lookout for new things, and there's plenty of AI based tools that we're starting to look at. Somebody just the other day was asking me about one for I think it's sort of note taking and actioning out of meetings called Otter AI. So that's
Yeah.
another one we're having a little toy around with at the moment. We're very open as a business to looking at tech for new and exciting ways of making life easier.
Yeah, Otter's great. I'm not a heavy user of Otter, and then I've been using something called Fireflies recently, which
Okay.
is like the bug, exactly the same spelling, fireflies.ai, and it's the same premise. And I think what they all do is they take the OpenAI Whisper API, and I think that's predominantly what people use, which is basically the voice recognition. And they do clever things with it because as standards, the Whisper API won't give you speaker labels, for example. So when you're producing a transcript, you can't get that from it. So that's where we've got this new wave of all of these, meeting transcription service coming in. we're keen to just extend Microsoft Teams because Teams Premium with their open AI relationship is going to enable just that, transcripts and then Q&A the transcript. The only thing that I found, and I think it's great, even if you can't Q&A the transcript to say, pull out the highlights or tell me what the next actions are, there is still value in you being able to focus on not making notes and having more of that human conversation. So even if you just got the transcript in raw text, it's better than having to type notes as you're speaking to somebody. So yeah, Otter, we've had that mentioned quite a lot on the podcast. So I'd say it's just as good as any.
I've always struggled with note taking in meetings, to be honest. I mean, not least because I can't really do two things at once. I'm either talking or listening, and that's what I focus on. But if I take sort of traditional handwritten notes, they often go into a notepad and I probably don't see them again. But on the other side, if I try and take my notes on my laptop, it's not giving us a great look in the meeting, which is, what are you doing? Are you actually listening? And it's like, yeah, I am. I'm taking notes, but it doesn't look like I'm engaged. So
Yeah.
anything that can, provide an alternative is something I'm always interested in.
I think it's one of the quickest wins. And of course, you and I have spoken about ChatGPT, and we've got a question topic coming up on that. But a lot of people are still figuring out what the use cases are. And it's difficult because with everybody on LinkedIn saying, if you're not investing in AI, you're falling behind, it's very difficult not to be psychologically and emotionally drawn into that. But, and it's not quite out yet. It will be by the time this comes out. But I had an AI roundtable discussion with 3 other people that we'd had on the podcast before. And one of the subjects of conversation is, yeah, it's great to have all these clever AI tools, but they are just tools at the end of the day. And it shouldn't change your process of looking at what do we want the end goal to be. Because I think at the moment, a lot of people are trying to re-engineer their process around an AI tool just because it exists rather than doing what they should be doing, which is looking at the outcomes and working back from there. But that use case that you just mentioned there is such a quick win. If you can have using the Fireflies example, you just invite Fred at Fireflies along to your meeting and that's your AI bot, right? It's so simple to get that real value.
Yeah, I mean, it reminds me of the old Steve Jobs quote, which is, don't focus on the technology, focus on the problem. I think we're going to go through this initial phase of, ooh, what can it do? Isn't that clever? And once we've got over that and we've had our fun, it's then going to be, okay, well, what is the actual pain that we're suffering, and how do we gear the technology around solving that as opposed to what's it capable of? But it's such a disruptive, exciting piece of tech that it's hard not to sort of get curious.
Yeah.
We just had our own company Chat GPT show and tell session last week where everybody was just encouraged to do a bit of a lightning format, 10 minutes on what could you get it to do.
Yeah.
So that was a really great way for us to all start talking about it. But it also help steer our thinking really into the next steps. Okay, we've got to actually be very rigorous about where and how we want to apply this. And I think businesses should think very carefully about using it to actually alter the value that they as a business add, because it could end up taking them down a path that they don't necessarily want to go down, particularly with so much unknown about where it's going and what the big AI firms might do. For me, at the minute, short term, it's those quick wins of, okay, is it just an annoying manual task there that AI could just do in a much better way? And at the minute, there seems to be lots of them.
Yeah, 100%. And it's slightly different to finance. Um, I mean, I've got I use Notion for my note taking. Everybody knows this because I don't stop banging on about it, right? I've got a Notion database that I just put in whatever tools I see come up in my feed or that I find online. And it's cool because I can tag them. I can say, oh, the use case for this is transcription, or the use case for this is that. And that's kind of reduced my overwhelm because instead of me thinking, oh, that looked really cool, I need to investigate it now, it's in the database and I just filter when I've got 30 minutes and say, oh, what do I want to have a play around with now? Right. So that's made it a lot bit more logical for me. But there are some companies that are going all in on AI, right? And I'll use an example that, as I say, isn't finance, but I won't name the products because I think there's a bit of a stir that's being caused by it anyway. But essentially, it's a content writing platform. Because of course, one of the primary use cases for ChatGPT when it came out is you don't have to write content anymore. Just give it a brief and it will write it for you. Now, of course, all of these SaaS companies have latched onto that and says, right, well, how do we make money from this? And the big thing at the moment is Google is still playing up with its spam algorithms, still playing catch up. So previously, if you were writing rubbish content and you were duplicating, you'd be shunted down the Google rankings because, but because Google haven't quite caught up with what is and isn't bot generated content, there are companies that are saying, right, well, we can get a platform to generate hundreds of blog articles for your website in minutes, and that's going to boost your SEO rankings or whatever. And right now, there's no issue with that. And it comes back to your point about, we don't know what's coming up. If I've just invested however many thousands of pounds in an AI tool that's basically created a website for me with 1,000 blog posts that Google then captures on to say, oh, we know that those 1,000 blog posts have been bot generated, we're going to immediately squash your rankings. What happens there? So I think the approach I think is the right approach of, what are the quick wins, what are the efficiency improvements that are going to add up to the bigger wins rather than totally reinventing the wheel. Because I think there's a risk there. It might not ever come. They might get away with it. Do you know what I mean? But you got to look at things objectively.
Yeah, I think the content question is going to be a really interesting one. I mean, it's not just blog posts and written text; it's also going to be the image generation and video content. And in a world of where all unlimited content can just be generated instantly, what is it people are going to want to consume? Do you want to read a blog post that's not written by a person?
And
Maybe.
how are you going to be
How are you
able to
going to
tell?
know?
And so we released a podcast today with John Ladaga, who's founder of a solution called Sturpy. I think you're probably a bit past it. It's kind of financial modeling for startups. You're scale up, so we're put you in that category. But we were talking about that human element, and I think we used the example of music. People tend to like music where they can spot the odd error, and it's kind of the inconsistencies and it's the dirtiness of some tracks that you really like. It's not all clean and polished. And I think we might move that with content. It's kind of like you get to the point where you're trying to spot the grammatical errors and the way that people speak, because that's the only way that that it's not been generated by a bot. Unless the bots then start deliberately generating grammatically correct content to try and fool people. And again, we don't have to go down that rabbit hole,
Be a
right?
never-ending cycle.
There we go. So the only last question before we move on to talking more over the talent acquisition and the HR piece that you guys do well is coming back to your role spanning multiple departments, right? Because I've had more conversations now about data-driven decisions and about finance taking more ownership over data. And there is some data that's obviously quantifiable, that we have really detailed metrics for, and some that we don't. So coming back to your point about, right, well, how do we gauge level of productivity working remotely? There's only so many stats you'll get out the back of Slack or Teams that will say, time on calls and number of emails sent or number of messages sent. It doesn't really add up to the overall sentiment. It can kind of, I suppose, gauge a base sentiment, but you're not going to hang your hat on it really. Versus the other stats that you're getting from your accounting software, relating to your recurring revenue figures and that sort of stuff. So the short question is, how important is data for you as somebody who wears multiple hats? And second question to that is, what's the level of accuracy that you need to be able to make decent decisions that you can hang your hat on?
Yeah, I mean, the answer to the first question is data is incredibly important. We are becoming, a much more data-driven business world. Any company that's not thinking like that, I think, is going to be left behind. One of the challenges is sometimes having too much data. I mean, we try and buy into mantras like measure what matters. And one of the key skills that I'm certainly trying to drive in our finance team is actually helping our colleagues in other teams understand what's data that you've got access to and looked great, but actually isn't telling us much, versus what's the data that we don't have, which we really should, because that's what's more important. And we live in a world where data is just piling up and piling up. We dump it all into our data lake in Snowflake, and then we try and make sense of it in various different ways. Because we've got we have got a small team, we've got people who are very focused and expert in what they do, and that might not be pouring through their CRM if it's that, or their other platform. to understand how to export and manipulate data. So I think for a business of a certain size where you don't have the potentially the resource to invest in a data science team who can do this as a shop, we do have to be able to acquire those skills and support the team doing them. I think in terms of the level of accuracy, absolutely, it's got to start with the question. And I always think, how many answers are there to this question? If there's
Mm,
only two answers, a yes or a no, then all the data I need has got to get me to make that decision.
mm,
If there's 20 different outcomes, then it's going to have to be a bit more accurate.
mm,
And so I'm always sort of banging that drum, particularly on the finance side. If we think about things like budgeting and forecasting, we're doing our FP&A and we're thinking, what level of detail or how much data do we actually need driving this model? I always try and pull it back to say, okay, is it going to change the outcome? Is it going to change the way that the board look at this? Is it going to change the investment decision? Or are we just being super, super accurate because we've got access to it and it's working?
mm,
Sometimes it's the latter. So we do have to pull ourselves back. I think it's also tempting to focus on data that you understand the best and also that looks the nicest and gives you a nice fuzzy feeling inside. I
mm.
think it's difficult to really focus on the stuff that you don't have access to that you really should be digging into, whether that's productivity or any kind of efficiency metric. Um, and from a from a from a financial metrics perspective, we're a B2B SaaS business, so there's a library of new metrics that we're all getting our heads around in the last 5 or 10 years. A lot of them are US centric.
Mm.
Interesting as a finance professional to find that balance between business metrics that we really care about versus the traditional IFRS reporting, in that sometimes there isn't a right answer, and you end up having to really lead the business through what are these metrics we're going to track? What do they mean? How are we defining them as a team? And go from there. I think the other thing on data is that what I've really seen in the last 4 or 5 years is so many different disciplines and industries and sectors people are coming from and really having to get on board with the data train, which is you can't keep your head in the sand from this any longer. Particularly if you work for a small business, you don't have access to that resource. You're going to have to pick up some key skills here, which is how do you interrogate that system that you've got, and how do you get those dashboards and get those reports running. And there's a bit of a battle there, I think, sometimes between people wanting to outsource it to a department and think I should have a person for that, versus perhaps this is something that you now need to be able to do going forward.
And I just want to come back to that point that you mentioned there, because I think it's so valid, and people could potentially get more caught up in this trap as AI continues to evolve. But thinking about the data that you don't have is just as important at looking at the data that you do have. And I can't remember the story. It's some sort of ancient proverb. It might be to Buddhist teachings or something like that. I can't remember, but the story is there's like a little teepee or a hut or something like that. And there's like a little oil lamp or a fire burning or something like that. And somebody drops something, and it goes outside the tent into the darkness. Um, and a dude in the tent looks around in the light to try and find where he's dropped something. Everybody knows it's gone outside, and they're like, "What? Why are you looking in here in the light?" And so, "Oh, because I can see in here. Can't see out there."
Yeah.
And to me, that really hit home when we look at data and those sorts of related concepts, because it's so easy to shine a light on the data that you do actually have, versus like getting stuck in the darker side, which is, oh right, well, how do we find the data in the cracks, the data that we don't have. So I think, as you're obviously doing, there's an exercise that needs to happen to say that, let's think about this critically. And that ties to the point I was making about AI, is there are endless tools that will pull together data that you already have, like Tablet, for example. And with some of the new chat interfaces where we're seeing, financial data tied with Google Analytics data and all of that sort of stuff. And it's very easy, as I say, to get caught into the trap of Q&A your data and it coming back with a response saying, oh, based on this time, based on what happened here, here, and here, I think as an AI, this could be the reason behind that. But it's only working from data that's actually got access to. And I think that's what we need to latch onto as humans, at least in the short term, is to say that we still do have that ability to think critically. and think, as cheesy as it sounds, outside of the box, for the data that sits behind the data, if I'm saying that right.
Yeah, I mean, I think to put that in another way, you're gonna get a limit of creativity from the AIs. And yeah, like you said, if I just give you one set of data from one source, as an AI, you can only be as creative with that data that you're shown. Whereas, humans that have spent a career in, a range of sectors and businesses will be able to bring that unknown into what's currently being done and add it in. Um, but I still think, something like an AI that can instantly understand what you're asking at, and if you give it if as long as you're comfortable with what it is that you're looking for, that's beyond, it probably will at least be able to guide you through. Okay, here's a step of how to go and get that data. So I'm personally a big fan of what's possible at the moment, and very excited about what's next. I've been trying to play around with ChatGPT and give it as much access to some of our data as we can. It's still in its dark room and won't talk to anything. But as soon as it can start to click into the data in a secure way, obviously,
Yeah.
I think we're all excited about having that sort of virtual CFO in our pocket that we can talk to and get everything done instantaneously.
Well, that's it. And so I'm not going to plug. I mean, I'm not affiliated to any of the guys that we've got on the podcast. I'm not getting kickback or anything like that. But the guys at Sturpy have just done their CFO chat, which ties together multiple data sources. So that's an example there. In terms of the quicker wins, I was having a chat the other day, see whether I can find it, because there are actually some pretty easy tools whereby you can query your own data. But again, I caveat that by saying that you've always got to look at the security policies. I think one that I saw come up was Genius Sheets. I don't know whether you've seen that or not. So I think that's potentially one that people can look into. As I say, I'm not sure how good it is, but that's one that I keep seeing come up again and again. And then the other one is Genius. Like stats to chat or something. I'll put it in the show notes.
Yeah.
But the URL is essentially 2stats.chat. And again, I've not tried this yet, but the tagline is simplify your data analysis experience with AI, upload your data set, and then chat with AI about the data. Yeah. But, again, what is the data? If it's just a single data source, as we've just been saying, there's a
Yeah.
limit to how good it's going to be. But there's a couple of basic ones that people can at least start in a bit
But
of.
as a non-data scientist, it's just the dream.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. That's it. I mean, when I first found out that ChatGPT could write code, I was like, what? I don't know how to become a developer. I have tried getting into code and failed miserably. So maybe I'm just not asking the right question.
Yeah, I'm still sort of hitting a few dead ends, and sometimes I get an incomplete response, and then I have to say, "You only gave me half the code. Can I have the rest of it?" And then it gives me a different starting point than the first answer, because there's not 100% consistency in what it's spitting out. So then I end up with two separate pieces of code that don't work together. But it's definitely getting there.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. And the auto GPT, I mean, we won't even get to asking questions pretty soon. We'll just give it a goal and it will do the rest for us. But that's a conversation for another day. I think.
That's when it starts to get really scary.
Yeah, yeah. So let's not go down that
Okay.
that rabbit hole. So no, that's good. So the next piece that I was really keen to talk about is specifically what you guys are doing, because we don't have a huge amount of guests on the show that have a footprint in HR, I guess. And this all comes from, I mean, we discussed it when I came to see you last, but there was a post that Arctic Shores did when ChatGPT first came out about the whole concept of using AI to write your CV for you. You know, and again, as we mentioned from the intro, Arctic Shores, you've got a proprietary, piece of tech that allows people to delve a bit deeper than just the CV, right? It's a behavioral assessment that allows you to gauge suitability of a candidate without, solely relying on a CV. And you can speak more about that if you like. But the interesting thing for me was people have been using software to write their CV for ages, right? Not just when ChatGPT came out. Maybe it's gone to the next level with a more intelligent algorithm, right? But people have been using software to do snazzy layouts and be creative, shall we say, with their CVs for quite a while. But there were some quite interesting stories that you mentioned on our last call about some people from your customer base that have been in completely different industries, but have ranked quite high on the EQ scale. But looking at their CV, you probably would have just discounted them straight away. So do you want to talk a little bit more about that? I think people will be interested to hear.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, before the arrival of ChatGPT, at It Shows, we've been advocates for a long time of there's lots of traditional hiring methods out there that just aren't working. The burning platform that we talk about is, we've got a record number of um, job vacancies in this country, and we've also got a record number of job seekers. So there's clearly a mismatch of skills going on. And why aren't this record number of people ending up in this record number of roles? Um, and it's because the methods that employers are traditionally relying on, such as CVs, aren't helping them distinguish who are right for these roles because it's focusing purely on experience, learned skills. But it also introduces a huge amount of bias. And this is, generally the story that gave birth to Arts It Shows. You look at a CV, and what you're really seeing is somebody's ability to write a CV, first of all, experience that they had access to based on their particular place in the world. But you're also picking up an awful lot of demographic data that's then generating, some unconscious bias in you. So particularly for entry level roles, and we work quite closely with employers that are taking on a lot of hires from graduates, skilled but entry level roles, and often when you're trying to sift through that many candidates at that kind of level, there isn't a lot to see on the CV anyway. So we've had a bit of a campaign for a while now saying scrap the CV. But what we are working with our customers on is not just a case of drop the CV, but actually rethink the way that you're hiring. So what Arts It Shows does is help people hire for potential. The assessment is a part of it, but it's also about thinking, okay, are we hiring people for the roles, or actually should we be thinking a little bit more about what roles will suit the talent that we can find? Because a lot of the jobs, I don't know, 10 years from now haven't been created.
Mm.
So there's a lot of, particularly in the engineering sector, they've got such fast moving technology and so much disruption going on that they actually have to think, okay, we have to bring in some talent with some potential, and then figure out what roles we can use them in the next 5 to 10 years, because we don't know what those roles are going to look like.
Sure.
So how do you do that? Where Arts It Shows comes in is, yeah, we have a behavioural based assessment, where candidates will behave naturally, and we will be able to observe their behaviour, generate thousands of data points, and pick out um, multitude of traits around their personality. We're also bolting on a more traditional aptitude test in terms of reasoning, and so between that, it really helps employers take forward in their hiring process candidates that perhaps they never would have seen. And we do have a case study that we'll be bringing out shortly, where we had a customer of ours trial a particular role completely without a CV, just on our hiring potential playbook. They had two roles available, two slots. They ended up with, I think, 8 candidates at the final interview stage. Their feedback was incredible in that they actually wanted to hire all 8 of the candidates. They would have done had they had more than two jobs available. But also, of those 8, they probably wouldn't have hired any of them had they used their traditional methods. And so it was just great to see that in action. Where ChatGPT comes in, though, is, I mean, you mentioned the CV. Yes, of course, there's been tools and help writing those CVs quite a long time, but it's also quite daunting what an instant AI might be able to help candidates do in terms of perhaps even interviews. You know,
Mm.
if it can listen to the interview questions and generate auto responses on your screen, again in a virtual remote world, that's something that we've got to think very carefully of. Um, a lot of the time, before we get to that CV review or the interview stage, there'll be application questions. There's just lots of different component parts about a traditional hiring process that a lot of particularly medium and large employers have, that
Mm.
is really sort of exposed at the minute to that disruptive technology coming in. And so that's why we feel so passionately about helping people really turn their thinking on its head in terms of how do I find those candidates that have got the potential rather than the skills and experience that I think I'm after.
I'd never thought about that before. Yeah, and it's I'm sure somebody's doing this already, but the example you gave there of being on an interview with having a live transcription of a bot being able to basically do like an auto prompt for you. It's terrifying, isn't it?
We're not that far away. Um, and so as a business, actually, we are looking to partner up with one or two video interview providers to figure out a solution for how we can address that. But yeah, there's a bit of a technological war going on really on either side in terms of the more tools and technology that employers can adapt to deal with a higher volume of applicants, but at the same time, applicants are also getting their hand on tech that helps them, apply for many, many more roles
Mhm.
in a more impressive way.
Yeah, I think so. Let's say that I'm into for Arctic shores, right? And we're on a call now, and I've got my Chat GPT equivalent that's giving me answers. With your experience, you would be able to tell whether I was reading from an auto prompt or not, right? So I think there's some things. Yeah, I think there's some things that we don't need to get too bent out of shape about. The CV writing and the interview questions, all of that sort of stuff. If it's offline, then I totally get how basically they've got access to information worded in a way that whatever they like, right? But I think you know we need to be confident in the fact that we can smell a rat sometimes, maybe. And I appreciate things are getting smarter, but I think it is still going to be a while before we get to the point where candidate can convincingly read off an auto prompt based on a live set of questions. Maybe that's me just being too optimistic though.
No, I think right now you're probably right. It's going to be pretty rare, and if you did find a candidate, I think that could successfully do that, it's probably a sign that you might want to hire them and find them a job.
Yeah.
But I mean, even just I think just a couple of months ago, I'd seen some software already that can instantaneously alter your eyes, so you can be looking over here, but to the camera it appears live as though you're staring straight
Oh,
at the camera screen. Quite useful for podcasters at the moment, but got obvious implications there. So, step by step, I think we'll get there fairly quickly. Trying to remember what the name of it is.
I,
I think
I
it,
don't think I want to know. Sounds creepy. No,
it's it looks a little bit odd right now, but pretty soon you will be able to tell the difference.
okay, it comes into that deep fake territory, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, it is scary, and I think I'm hoping we don't get to a point where our default is just hyper vigilant, and a lot of people, and I kind of fall into this category from a few years ago, right? I've always been quite gullible. Like I want to believe something. That's my default. My default is to believe something rather than reject it. And I don't think I'm alone. So I think for people like me, it is going to be a bit of a learning curve because as more and more of this deep faked, artificial stuff comes along, I mean, I think I'm going to struggle to spot it, at least initially, before I get into like a rhythm of really analyzing stuff. I don't know about you, but yeah, I think I'm going to struggle a bit.
Well, I'm probably the opposite. I tend to not believe anything, and I need to be convinced of anything pretty much. I think it sort of serves me well in my role to be able to question everything
Yeah.
and need convincing. But yeah, I mean, I like to think that, to some degree, it might actually, it might encourage us to perhaps potentially drop a few bits of technology. So, for example, does the interview now need to actually be in person? Okay, well, there might be a cost associated to doing that and getting people together in person, but then suddenly you've found a way around this tech issue. So, I feel like we may find out, there might be a balance to be found between using tech and actually going back to some more traditional approaches. We'll see.
Oh, will you go back to just hiring in Manchester?
I think it's a big open topic at the minute, isn't it? Really, a lot of firms, particularly tech startups, went remote first. So a lot of them incorporate in the last few years, and just from day one, post COVID, just said we're fully remote. And there's obviously lots of different use cases. I think a lot of businesses will be really looking at this at the moment, looking at all that data that's accumulated, and said, what are the pros and cons, and start to balance those out. Because I'm sure a lot of people speak a lot better than I do that, we are humans and we do crave physical interaction with each other and we are better in groups. That's how we evolve. So yeah, for me, I think maybe the pendulum will swing a little bit towards, getting back together a bit more in person and finding a way to find that happy medium really.
Mm. It is difficult though, because I mean, talent is still an issue. You can be the best company in the world with the best benefits in the world, but you are still going to lose some employees for the next best. You know, there'll always be a faster growing company. There'll always be a bigger salary. So you just got to accept that, you're not going to always, you know, I don't think win an employee is the right word. You're not always going to have a successful, you're not always going to have a job offer that's accepted, I guess is what I'm getting to there. And like you say, we're quite keen to have people in face to face for at least the later stage of the interview, even though the first bits are done remotely, right? Um, but it is interesting to see different personality types, and we've had uh, one or two recently whereby people have been rejecting higher salaries if they can work completely from home, which I kind of get, and I get your point there about us being social animals as well. But some people, they do just want to sit at home with their dog, and they will make life decisions based on that. And I don't know whether there's a right or wrong behind that, but I suppose providing they can get that social interaction that they crave via, Facebook, TikTok, whatever it happens to be. I mean, maybe that's the future, isn't it? Maybe, well, again, we'll have to see. I mean, coming back to the point that we mentioned there about, that huddle process, right? You know, are we going to get to the point where, you jack into the matrix almost and you go to your office and your visor comes down, and you've got like a 360 view and you've got your huddle on the right with your colleagues over there you can shout to, and then you've got your desktops on I don't know. It's going to be fascinating to see where it goes, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's like when I think about the AI piece, the technology is moving at sort of lightning pace, but I think, as people, we are quite slow often to adopt some of
Mm.
this, and we do, take our time getting things adopted. I remember putting on a VR headset for the first time ever, I don't know, 5 years ago, and then saying, "That's it now. That's just how everything is going to be." And 5 years later, we're not really anywhere close to mass adoption. And I think it's similar with AI. I think people are going to have that nervousness of, oh my God, the robots are coming. What are we going to do 20 years from now? I think initially focus is really going to be, okay, how can this just be an assistant to me for now? So I think we as a society have a way of slowing down adoption, even though the tech and I'm sure the vendors are ready to just disrupt the earth tomorrow. Um, but in terms of the work-life balance point you made, I think it's been some strange times in the last 2 or 3 years. Um, and, we go through economic cycles, and I think the jury's probably still out as to whether can all the numbers add up with having people have that choice of, "Okay, yeah, I'll take a lower salary at home." It's all gotta, the circle's gotta be completed really, and it's gotta make sense in the long run. We've just not really had enough time, I don't think, to figure that out. But it's just great that we've all got options and that there's various different ways of doing things. And 30 years ago that wasn't the case. It was put your suit on and into the office you go, and you've got no choice. And I think it probably opens up way more benefits than the issues it might cause.
Yeah. We would, and it's a side note, but you talk about putting your suit on there. Like when I first started working remotely, I'd still put on my smart clothes even to go into my home office, because that's what then drew the distinction between I'm in work mode and I'm in personal mode. But now I'm speaking to customers and colleagues, and there's been a definite shift in the workplace attire, and it's how you manage that as well, because you know is it one set of rules for people working remotely to people coming into the office? Because if you're having customers come into the office, the office needs to be smart. People need to be presentable. So where are the lines? And there's no right or wrong answer to this, but it doesn't make things any easier, does it?
No, I mean, I think before sort of COVID, there was a trend towards a bit more of a, dress for your day sort of style, which is okay if you're going to be meeting a client, perhaps then maybe you go a bit smarter. But generally, offices were becoming much more open plan and a bit more informal. But it was interesting the transition that you mentioned, which is, we we have a lot of psychologists, and we're got a lot of science at it shows, and we're always interested in the psychology piece. And there's been a lot of, I think, thought pieces on the commute to work can be a psychological barrier that separates you from your job and helps you manage with that work life balance. Because the danger is that some of us that are fortunate to have our own home offices, you're just a few steps away from your home life. And so psychologically, are you actually switching off and making that distinction? And what are the long term risks and implications of that? Again, still quite early, and time will tell. But I'm starting personally to go back into the office a little bit more often, and I do sort of get that sense of I actually quite like sitting on the train, and just something in my brain is probably switching from A to B, and vice versa when I go home. So yeah, I think it's just picking the best bits of each really, and finding a way to make it work.
Yes, it is moderation, and I commute maybe once or twice a week. Depending on traffic, that could be 3 hours. It could be 6 hours. You never know, right? And it's nice to listen to your podcast and, as you say, get that segmentation of this is the clear balance. But you know, yeah, it's nice to have a home office. Yeah, it is the boundaries that's the difficult piece. And you've got twins, right?
Yes, I've got twins, 3-year-old boys, so sometimes they'll tell me when it's time to make that
Yeah,
transition to
bang,
dad.
banging on the door, come down. Yeah, yeah. A 10 months and a 2.5-year-old, and I can hear him screaming now. The microphone's good. It's good at getting rid of the background noise. But yeah, I mean, it's nice, but at the same time, sometimes it would be nice if you just had a nice little office that was a 5-minute walk up the road, and then that's that, and you can segment the two. I know a lot of people that built their businesses around finding an office that's close to home, so that they get the best of both worlds. Maybe one day.
Yeah, yeah, I think maybe that balance might be something around that, local satellite offices that have just about got that bit of distance, but aren't, in the big city with the commute and the cost maybe. Yeah. It's interesting what you said before about the personality types though, because again, it's completely close to what we do, which is perhaps now you start when you're looking for talent, think, okay, well, this is our way of working. Now, which of these candidates that are coming to us are more suited to that style?
Mm.
Are these the type of people that need that connection and benefit from, or are they going to be able to be completely independent at home? These aren't the sort of questions we used to ask 5, 10 years ago, and so they're becoming more and more important. So how a company is going to be able to find that answer? Well, so we can help.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Shameless plug.
Yeah, serious, but yes, it comes down to that cultural fit, doesn't it? But I suppose that's one of the more difficult aspects to quantify. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we've done it in the past. We have a way of measuring cultural fit with our clients. They have specific criteria and traits that they look for that represent the fit and the values of that business. So it is something that we've definitely done. We also like the idea though of not just cultural fit, but also cultural add, because it's great hiring people that are just like you, but you're going to sort of lose that diversity of thought. And actually, what you might want to look for is people that aren't in what you think is your cultural, style. You actually need people who can bring that diversity. So I think there's lots of new, interesting ways of thinking about that.
Yeah. So the takeaway for everybody listening is don't just rely on your CV. If preferable, obviously speak to Arctic Shore, but try building more of those, I suppose, behavioral type characteristics, especially for the junior guys, right? So that's all good. So I appreciate we've got a bit over, Craig, but have you got
No
another
worries.
sort of 5, 10 minutes? Yeah.
Yeah, sure, yeah.
So two questions then, and one does relate more specifically to tech. And I know you and I have had some conversations around this, but you've managed to keep your team quite lean whilst being quite shrewd and savvy with the tech that you use, and you've gone more down the sort of best of breed rather than an all encompassing end to end, right?
Sorry, I've got the invader that I said
The
I
alarm
might
clock.
get later. It's going to have to be a lock on the door as the next Amazon purchase.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, when I joined Artsy Shores, the finance team was 2 people. We're now 4 to 5 times bigger in revenue, same team size in finance. So how do we do that? Well, like any startup, in the early days, so much of the stuff was manual or Excel based. So it was pretty obvious early on as we grew at the rate we were growing. we need to get things in order. Option A is hire more people. Option B is find some clever tech that can avoid that. I mean, I've managed bigger teams in the past. Um, don't see any, issue with it at a larger business, but for a small, fast-growing startup, I think it just limits your options moving forward. Whereas with a bit of clever tech, you can always, turn it off and go and switch it out for something else. Um, because once you've built a team, it's bigger it gets, the harder it can be for it to adapt. But also, depending on the business that you're at, we're venture backed, but we've always had to be very savvy with how we invest our money, and we're gonna grow in those areas that are gonna really scale the business. And often, like a lot of back office functions, your finance and your HR, you've really got to sometimes work within a fixed budget. So it's always about thinking, okay, value for money. And every time you look at the market, there's a new solution out there that might potentially improve or assist or even replace a traditional finance role. Um, so as I mentioned, we're a B2B SaaS business, so we're based on subscription. So we previously might have had 5 or 6 of our first customers managing their subscription on Excel. It's just not possible with, more than 100 customers at play. So we have to bring in a subscription management tool. The team grows. So then suddenly you can't keep all of your personnel records and HR documents on G Drive anymore. You've got to get it into a system. Otherwise, how on earth are you going to see all that data? Um, and so how I started it was when making those first couple of early finance hires, was making sure that the people joining the team had that same mindset, which is I don't really want to work hard through this problem. I'd rather work smarter, maybe use some clever tech to help me, rather than have anybody come in who thinks, I want to build a finance team so that I feel like I'm important and have people to boss around. We really just want to focus on, okay, what are the problems this business is going to face as it scales, and how can we help solve them? So I think that served us well, particularly in finance. Also great to be able to set the example to other teams to say the answer isn't always, bums on seats, and there's other ways to think about it. One thing I always like to bring home to people is if you make that permanent hire, you got to think, okay, what's the average salary? What's the average, life cycle that employees spend at our business? Okay, well, multiply one by the other. You could potentially be making a £250,000 decision or more potentially. So with that in mind, is there another way of doing it? Could it be a fixed term hire, or could it be some tech? Could it be something that you could get on a monthly basis? And I think that's particularly important particularly for fast growing small businesses where they're not sat on a pot of gold to suddenly just make all these hires. So that's always the view that we've had, particularly in the finance team. Um, but it's also acknowledging that eventually you are going to get to that point where you're going to need some brains behind all these tools, because they're not all completely flawless and magical. They do need some interrogation. Um, and what we're also very conscious of is making sure that as we scale as a business and as we start to, automate more and more, we don't go too far with it. So we're in, as I mentioned, in sort of medium to large enterprise space. So our ARR per customers in 5 figures and plus. So we're not a very, very high volume, low value subscription based business. We're not doing sort of $20, $30 a month on a credit card sort of thing. So when it comes to some of those really important business processes, order to cash, we've really got to balance out. There's some really important stuff here that's actually just worth the time of a human who knows what they're doing, getting it right, rather than spending their life trying to understand why the software has got all these glitches. So it's finding that balance between making sure that you're ready for scale, but you don't take it too far that you end up over automating and spending your life trying to tinker with the machine, figuring out why it's not working.
Mm. It, and it's a question because I often refer to it as the patchwork quilt approach, because yes, you've got sort of I guess the best of the best for a specific function, right? But at some point, there's going to have to be a consideration if they flow between departments of how these systems talk to each other. Not all systems need to integrate though. If you can dump out data into something like you said, Snowflake or a BI tool like that, then the systems don't need to talk to each other if you're just combining data from those systems in a platform, but some do need to talk. So does that come into your consideration when you're going to market for these best of breed tools? Is there like a foundation that says at the very least they've got to integrate out the box, for example?
I think right now, yes. And in the last couple of years, definitely, there's certain tools that you'll already have that teams are embedded with and like and can't move away from.
Mm.
And so that at the moment, there's just some must have integrations. I mean, as I mentioned, we brought in a subscription management tool. Well, it had to talk to our accounts ledger, it had to talk to our CRM. And if it didn't have an out the box integration ready to go, it kind of wasn't going to be able to do its job. We would have just been constantly having to upload data into it every day. So at the minute, yeah, I think we're still in that space where we do need that easy to use out the box integration. But as we move forward, it's going to be much easier with AI tools, or you've got things like your Zapier that can start to actually help you do some no code building, where you can actually get these things to talk to each other, even if the vendors themselves never really envisioned the integration.
Yeah.
And the chat based AIs are just make that even easier. So I'd say right now, yes, but I think that's not going to be the case for much longer. But again, the temptation is also potentially going to be to try and integrate everything
Yeah.
and just think, well, let's just get every single piece of data and all these systems all talking to each other. And you're not really thinking about why. What value is there to get that system to receive data from there? Because you can potentially just be every time you connect two systems and you're doing a push, you can also potentially just be duplicating your data, because then you've got to store it in another place. So you can end up with just custom fields replicated in all these different systems. And now you've got 18 different places to find the same answer to the question.
Yeah.
So I think the strategy and the long term thinking around where do we want to go with this data is more important than what can actually connect today.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and that's the reason that I asked the question is because when I'm going through an assessment process, or looking for tools, for me or the company or whatever, is the first question is, will they natively integrate? So has that tool already got a proven integration directly with that other application? So that's firstly, and that's a big tick if it does it right. Because it's nice to know that at least somebody's already gone through the hard work, right? But the second question is then, is there a middleware that we can use? And that's when we are into Zapier territory, which scares people a lot. And I agree, because anywhere where there's a middleware, you can't say 100% that's going to be a really good integration. But I think it is getting better. Coming back to your point there, Zapier obviously have now started to build chat into their platform. So it's getting to the point where you can say, oh, I've got this application and this application. What fields do I need to connect to each other? And then it will start doing the mappings for you. And immediately we're then moving away from this, manual, right? Well, here's the trigger points that you have in this system, and here's the acceptable, receipt points in the other system. You're going to have to find a way to match that. But it's all on you if you get it wrong. But there's a Zapier expert that you can pay a ton for if you want to pay us to do it. All of that sort of stuff. So I'm hoping we move a little bit away from this. But as you say, it's all about making sure that there is a reason for that. And coming back to your point about duplicate data, yes, wholeheartedly agree that there are some data points where you need to have a master record for certain types of data. Yeah. So for stuff like inventory, customers or suppliers, there needs to be a single source of the truth. But to get bent out of shape to the point where you're over engineering something to the point where you say, well, if we do that, we might end up with a duplicate here. Like duplicating a document once in 1,000 runs isn't, enough to get Banner out of shape about. So I think there's tolerances that we need to bear in mind when we're setting these things up right. Just because something isn't perfect doesn't necessarily mean that it's a no-go. Likewise, there's a very big difference between something that isn't perfect and something that isn't perfect and also won't scale. And I think that's the bigger question. You don't want to develop something that's imperfect that you're then going to have to re-engineer in 6 months' time.
Yeah, I mean, what we've sometimes been guilty of, and I'm sure a lot of people do, is um, when you live in a world where you're just using so many of these SaaS tools as a small business, you're not going to go and get yourself any bespoke software. So you're doing it all based on the tech stack of cloud-based SaaS software, is to try and put your own stamp on it and try and customize it to reflect you as a business. But you might find 2 or 3 years down the line, if you need to migrate or if you do need to integrate, actually we've created all of these custom fields, this custom data, and we thought it was great at the time, but now we've just created a whole load of work for ourselves. And so one of the things we try and encourage, in particularly on the finance side, is try as much as we can to actually use these tools as they were designed,
Mm.
because the functionality is all based around the data that it's expecting, not the
Yeah.
data that you're just feeding to it.
Yeah.
And then it just go back to that point about the integrations is I see a huge difference between two systems that are integrated that connect to workflow versus two systems that are just sending data to each other for the sake of it. Sometimes that second one can be because the user of one platform just wants to be able to see everything,
Yeah.
doesn't really want to go over here and log into the second system.
Yeah.
Probably a bit more of a sophisticated answer to that than just APIing data back and forth, just so it lives everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's always worth having a bit of an audit of the tools that you are using before you obviously invest in new ones as well. Because, and I use a dead simple example, which is previously I'd use Evernote for my notes or OneNote or whatever I happened to be preferred at the time. And then I'd have Trello to do the Kanban, what stage of progress are my tasks in. But then I moved over to Notion, again, mentioning Notion again. But that meant that I could have both a task list with Kanban and also a notebook. So I've basically then squashed, two or three apps into one. Right. So I think instead of this additive mentality that we kind of get into, it's always worth going out and saying, right, well, you know, there maybe is crossover between these two. Is there a new tool now that's able to facilitate both of those so that we can, might not be a reducing spend, right? That might not be the exercise. It might just be a reduction in complexity that we're looking for. So I think it's well worth going through that exercise every now and then as well.
I mean, a lot of the good, successful SaaS businesses that you just mentioned there, they focus very much on a problem that exists at the time that they started,
Yeah.
and they solve that problem very well. I think it was very difficult for them, a little bit similar to the point you made earlier on about the data that you can't see,
Yeah.
which is there's another problem that's created that's outside of your tool that your customers are experiencing, and it's not what your tool does; it's the interaction with another one.
Mhm.
Now there's a whole secondary layer of problem. So can you solve that together? Well, if it's two separate companies, often that's quite laborious, and neither party wants to pay for it, and it takes time.
Yeah.
If you Google, then you can actually just quickly switch something on, and it's all singing and all dancing. Because your Evernote or now your Notion reminds me of suddenly seeing there was something called Google Keep. Oh, well, now I can just send notes into it, and it can connect into my calendar invites and my emails, and isn't this lovely? So there's definitely a difference between the big players who can really iterate quickly and versus the scrappy startups that are trying to keep up, because we're now into that phase now where it's all about the connectivity
Yeah.
rather than just the individual problems.
100%. And I do, I mean, because there's been some fear in the marketplace now. Microsoft have basically announced their Notion competitor. So they're basically now to the point where they can get rid of a lot of the startup market because they've got more developers, they've got more budget, and so on and so forth. But Notion does have a bit of a cold following, so I think it will be okay. And especially some of the stuff that people are doing with APIs now. Coming back to the point about transcription that you mentioned earlier, and I'm still yet to do it, but I'm going to do it. There's a dude that get his newsletter, and I'll put it in show notes because I can't remember. But essentially, he's using the Whisper API, which is open to anyone. It's cheap as chips. It's like zero point 0.0 pence for however many minutes of transcription. So it's not going to break the bank. But he's essentially set up a workflow so that he can drop an audio recording that he gets on his phone. He drops it into Dropbox. And then essentially, he uses a platform that ties Dropbox to Notion. And using ChatGPT in the middle, it takes the transcript. ChatGPT asks the questions like, pull out the highlights, do all of that sort of stuff. And then it automatically drops it into a new Notion database. So he's essentially got a virtual assistant for his voice notes that not just transcribes it, but then also pulls out all of the relevant points from it. I'll put that in the show notes as well, because I think, coming back to the easy wins, that's the sort of stuff that I'm seeing the real value in with AI at the moment, as opposed to, the whole reinventing the wheel type stuff. So, but
Yeah, it's amazing how fast it evolves, trying to keep up.
Yeah, all good. So the last question, Craig, and then I'll let you know, it's a question that I always ask on these shows, and we've talked about a couple already, Slack, some of the other tools that you use. But I would ask whether there's a gadget or a tool, and it could be a phone app, it could be a piece of software that you use that you couldn't live without. And answers we've had could be something as simple as, I couldn't live without Audible on my commute to work. And we had one that was like an audio and a video editing tool. We've had GIF creators. We've had all sorts. So anything that comes to mind.
Hmm. Um, I think I'm just gonna have to be boring and say Slack,
Right.
because it's just so damn good at what it does. I can be here on my laptop. It can help me just jump on instant video calls with people. But then I can also be sat in front of the TV with a beer, and if my CEO decides to send me a quick instant message, it's just there, and it's just so easy to get it responded to. And as I said at the start, it's just one of those things where now that I'm used to it, I just can't see myself working in a business that doesn't have it, or something pretty
Something.
much identical to it. So
Yeah, that's right. And of
not the
course,
most exciting answer, but yeah.
your default response when your boss messages you when you're having a beer is a picture back to the boss of said beer saying, "Why are you messaging me when I'm drinking it?"
I like to think my Giphy game's pretty strong because there's a great little widget in Slack that you can just talk to each other through GIFs. So
Yeah.
I'm getting there, but I'm probably
It's
sounding older than I am.
a new language, isn't it? GIFs. And then
Yeah.
obviously there'll be AI generated soon, so you'll be able to send gifs of your actual self doing actual things. I've no doubt about that. If people aren't doing that already, of course.
Yeah, actually think GIFs are undervalued because the reason I think they're so popular is they can get across that sentiment or that tone that you're trying to get at when just words is just open to too much misinterpretation. The GIF represent what it is you're actually trying to convey in terms of feeling.
Yeah, yeah,
Because one of the challenges with all this remote work is, especially with with emails, is you don't want people to take it the wrong way.
yeah, yeah,
So I'm actually a big believer in them.
yeah, yeah. The sigh emoji face is not the same as somebody like physically dropping to then. Yeah, I get that. I totally get that. I remember when I think it was first on iPhone. It's called like My Emoji or something like that. Do you remember? You take a picture of your face and it basically makes an emoji out of your face.
Yeah.
I think the next wave of that is maybe a My Emoji like GIF slash virtual avatar of yourself type approach, whereby you can essentially type in your GIF criteria and it will place you in the GIF.
Mm.
We'll have to see it.
Well, I'm not sure that sort of myself would be doing that on a daily basis, but we've got generations of young people coming through that are so comfortable with cameras in their face and self-recording themselves as content that I'm sure it won't be long before that's just normal.
Not too long. Kids today, eh? Yes.
Speaking of which,
All right, mate. I'll let you go. But it's been a pleasure to have you on. Really
thank
appreciate
you
it.
very much. Yeah, really enjoyed it.
All right, mate.
Speak soon.
We'll catch up soon. See you in a bit.
Cheers. Bye bye.